don't think this is a very good idea. And we wonder how these children will turn out. It's possible that when they grow up, having been paid to write thank you notes, they will develop the habit of doing so, a habit that may continue when they're no longer paid. Maybe they will learn the higher motive of gratitude, in which case all will be well. That's one scenario, developing a habit that will ultimately lead to the higher motive. But it might also turn out that these children will learn a different lesson. They may learn the lesson that thank you notes should be written to make money. They are a chore, a job for pay. And if that's the lesson they learn, then when the money stops, so will the thank you notes. Their moral education will have been corrupted, and they may find it difficult to learn the virtue of gratitude. It's hard to say what will happen with these children. But what's at stake are the attitudes and norms that are appropriate to writing thank you notes or to reading books. The danger that money, that cash incentives can crowd out non-market values worth caring about, that danger is not restricted to questions of thank you notes and reading books. Let me give you another example. In Switzerland, they were trying to decide where to locate a nuclear waste site. No community wants one in its backyard. They are risky. There was a small town in the mountains in Switzerland that seemed to be the safest place for the nuclear waste site. But the local community had to agree. And so before the parliament decided, a survey was done asking residents of this Swiss town the following question. If the parliament decides that your town is the safest place for the nuclear waste, would you approve having it here? 51% said yes, they would be willing. Then they asked a second question. They improved the offer. They said, suppose the parliament votes to put the nuclear waste site in your town and offers to pay financial compensation every year to each resident of the town, up to 6,000 euros. Then would you be willing to accept the nuclear waste site? Now how many do you think were willing? What would you say? 90%? 95? 100%?
10%. 10%.
Lower?
Could be lower.
Lower?
Yes.
How many think lower? How many think 90% or more? The number dropped from 51% in half to 25%. Now, from the standpoint of standard economic reasoning, this is a paradox. Usually, if you pay people to do something, there are more people who are willing to do that thing. Here, when people were offered money, their willingness to accept the nuclear waste site went down, not up. It fell by half. How can we explain this? Does anyone have an explanation? What would you say? You can just call it out. But can you explain it? Okay, go ahead. Yeah. Yes, go ahead.
안녕하세요. 제 이름은 김상현입니다. 그러니까 돈을 준다는 인센티브가 주어진 거잖아요. 그 마을 사람들에게. 근데 그 인센티브가 주어지기 전에 그 의회 결정을 받은 사람들은 그 마을이 적합해서 그 자신들이 그런 의무감에 해야 된다는 생각이 있었는데 이제 인센티브가 부여되고 나서는 사람들이 그 더 이상의 그런 의무감을 잃게 되는 거라고 생각합니다. 그러니까 그런 아까 책을 읽을 때 인센티브를 주고 읽고 그런 거와 그 연관성이 있게 이제는 폐기물 그 처리장이 자신들의 마을에 들어올 때 그 인센티브가 들어온 이상 그게 더 이상 의무가 아니라는 거죠. 그러니까 자신들에게 그런 자신들의 그 마을이 가장 적합한 곳이어서가 아니라 자신들이 이제 인센티브를 받아서 그 폐기물이 들어준다는 게 그런 생각이 들어서 이제 줄어든 것 같다고 생각합니다. 네.
Right, great. Thank you very much for that. That's very clever. I think that is what happened. The reason standard economic logic did not work in this case is that when the 51% were willing to accept it, they were willing to accept a burden, to make a sacrifice for the sake of the public good, because they believed that their town was the safest place for the nuclear waste. Even though they weren't happy to have the waste there, they were willing to make that sacrifice out of a sense of obligation. Then, when they're offered money, they thought, now this is a financial transaction. And we are not willing, for 6,000 euros, to subject ourselves and our families to the risk. So, in fact, when they asked the people who had changed their minds why they changed their minds, do you know what they said? They said, well, we didn't want to be bribed. And the monetary offer felt like a bribe. Not only that, the monetary offer, just as was suggested here, changed the relationship. It crowded out the sense of obligation. This brings out an important feature of market incentives in certain circumstances. Sometimes market incentives can crowd out other values. In this case, a sense of obligation. Consider another story. In Israel, there were some daycare centers, some nurseries, that had a familiar problem. Parents coming late to pick up their children. A teacher had to remain with the children of the late arriving parents until they came. With the help of some economists, the daycare center came up with a solution. They established a fine for any parent who arrived late. What do you suppose was the result?
They showed up even later.
There were more parents coming late. More, not fewer, once the fine was established. Here again, from the standpoint of standard economic reasoning, this is a paradox. If you raise the price of a good, normally you would expect fewer people to consume that good. That's the standard price effect, as the economists say. But here, it had the opposite result. Why? What had happened? Well, before, parents parents who came late felt guilty. They felt they were imposing on the teachers. But once a fine was established, the parents treated the fine as if it were a fee for a service, like a babysitting fee. And if you're paying someone a fee for a service, there's no reason to feel guilty. So here again, the introduction of a monetary incentive or disincentive had the effect of crowding out attitudes and norms, a sense of obligation that existed before the monetary disincentive was introduced. When they saw what happened, the daycare center said, well, the fine didn't work, we better remove it. They dropped the fine. But parents still came late at the increased number, which also shows something important about markets and non-market values. Once a sense of obligation is dissolved or eroded or lost because it's been crowded out by a monetary relationship, that sense of obligation may be very difficult to revive. What these examples suggest is that standard economic thinking misses an important aspect of human experience and social relationships. Economists often assume that markets that markets are inert, that they are neutral, that they do not change the character of the goods being exchanged. This may be true when we're talking about material goods, like flat screen